Two cameras, same brand, same sensor, same processors. Yet, so different. So we're left with a reasonable question. Heat management, viewfinder, body design, breathing compensation, hand grip, card slots, autofocus, USB streaming, image stabilization, memory, and price to name a few. But the real question is,
what's worth it to you?
And if you can figure that out, then your problem's solved and you don't need me. But if you're still interested, then let's get down to the nitty-gritty and talk about the particulars. Hit me, Todd.
You want the facts? Let me give them to you.
The ZVE1 is selling for $1,300 less than the A7S III. That's probably the timeout. Sony, go look at the feedback. Pretty much everyone thinks the ZVE1 should be under $2,000. All right, let's get back to the video. Which camera should you pick up or upgrade to? The A7S III or the ZVE1? Everything you just saw was shot on the Sony A7S III and could have been shot on the ZVE1 because it houses the same sensor. It's for that reason we will be focusing on the image you will get out of them and what makes them different. I've owned the A7S III for over 2 years and it's been my main workhorse on every video. Todd and I shot a commercial that played at the Orange Bowl with the A7S III. I've shot over 50 headshots. I've used it to help grow my channel to darn close to 30,000 subscribers. I don't tell you this to brag, but there has to be some qualifying factors in order to gain the credibility to speak on behalf of the A7S III, a real user with real world experience and real insight. My goal is not to discourage you by telling you things that make you feel like it's out of your league, or you'll never get here because it seems too difficult. My goal is to show you that you can do it, you can do whatever you set your mind to, and these cameras are only tools to help you get there. We're going head on with this comparison, and hopefully you and I will come out on top today on the FA. Can't believe this camera is considered old now. I'm an old timer. Listen up, Sonny boy, this camera is as new as the day I got it. I'm using the FX30 with the 35mm f1.8 as my A cam, and the ZVE10 with the Viltrox 13mm as my B cam. I'll be showing you the images that I've shot with the A7S III over the past years to whet your appetites to what you would get with that $2,200 ZVE1.
Your camera is only as good as the film you feed through it.
Let's start with the 1 card slot on the ZVE1 compared to the 2 card slots on the A7S III. I'm not too worried about the 1 slot on the ZVE1 because I've never really had any card issues or cards fail on my Sony cameras. These Sony cameras are so reliable. The ZVE1 doesn't accept CF Express cards, just regular size cards, and that, however, might pose a potential problem. I've used only these pro grade cards in my A7S III, and I've had several times where I get that data recovery message pop up on my screen, and that just means that the clip that you just recorded didn't record. I don't know if this is a pro grade problem or an A7S III problem, but it could be catastrophic if you're filming something or someone important. I've heard that this does not happen with the CF Express cards. Please let me know if you've had similar experience in the past. Either way, SD cards for the ZVE1 will be way cheaper than the CF Express cards that you can get for the A7S III. And don't forget that with CF Express cards, you can record 4K 120 all intra, so you won't be able to do that with the ZVE1. I've never shot in that anyway, so I'm all good over here. Now let's talk about the build and the body. The A7S III is heavier, it's bigger, it has a better grip and an EVF with more buttons and more dials, which means you can customize it easier. The ZVE1's body is like a combination between the ZVE10 and the A7SIII. Small Rig and others will come out with a cage for the ZVE1. As we talked about in the past, the cage is not only for accessories, but to give the camera a better grip and protect it from accidental drops. So I personally don't think the ZVE1 body will pose that much of a difference for me, but buttons on the outside will. The A7S III has this mode selector on the top with memory sections 1, 2, and 3, and more buttons on the outside of it. I would personally miss the mode selector and all of the buttons that you can customize on the outside of the A7S III if I went with the ZVE1. Also, the wheel on the front and the back of the A7S III makes it super easy and quick to adjust my aperture and shutter speed, whereas the ZVE1 doesn't have that, so I would miss that too. The second I have to dive into the menu for something while I'm out shooting is the second that I wish I had more buttons to customize on the outside of my camera. So the A7 A7S III is my preferred camera for that reason. The ZVE1 does have a fully functioning touch menu, where the A7S III only has touch tracking, but that's not a big deal to me because I don't like touching my screens and getting oil from my fingers on them and then they just start getting nasty. I try to do everything only using the menu buttons. Before we proceed into the heart of the video, I want to thank today's sponsor, which is TimeBolt. Don't skip ahead because we're doing a giveaway for a lifetime key. If you're editing Zoom videos or you go unscripted, you're going to love this software. I was already a paid user of TimeBolt before they sponsored this video. TimeBolt has saved me countless hours in the editing process by removing all of the silent parts and the ums and the ahs and any unique word tick phrase. Time is everything, especially in this industry, and whether you're doing client head shoots or YouTube videos, this software will save you so much time and give you more time to create. On your desktop, drop the file in. Dead air is auto removed. After it does its thing, I export the XML right into Final Cut, but it does create export files for all different types of popular editing software. Once I get it into Final Cut, this is what the video looks like, but the XML allows me to edit back in those silent parts if I want it. So nothing is actually set in stone, which blew my mind. TimeBolt, break the fourth wall and be seen, which is kind of the point of life. In order to enter the giveaway for a lifetime key, you'll need to keep watching, and I'll tell you somewhere between now and the end of the video how to enter. The EVF on the A7S III is really personal preference. I do use it, and when I do, I'm happy I have it. But if I didn't have it, I would just make do like I always do and probably be fine. I do like how the ZVE1 is lighter without the EVF, which means you can go on longer shoots and throw it onto a gimbal a little bit easier, be easier to balance because it wouldn't be so top heavy. And if you're only shooting video, then the ZVE1 would suffice. The A7S III does have a full-size HDMI and the ZVE1 has a micro HDMI. This is a pretty big deal to me because before I bought the A7S III, I had the A7 III, which was my A-cam. This camera has a micro HDMI over it, and once you start using it, it gets a little sketchy over time, especially if you're on a gimbal and your HDMI cord goes into the side of it. It starts to get a little bit loose, and I cannot imagine how much it would cost to repair that port. I much prefer the full-size HDMI on the A7S III, so that micro HDMI might be a problem with the ZVE1. And being able to download your LUTs onto your camera is huge. Like I said, when I shot that Orange Bowl commercial with Todd, I actually had to download the LUTs onto my FX30 so that I could properly expose the S-Log footage right on set rather than kind of guess and hope that I'm exposing right and then get home and wrestle with the color grade. Whereas the A7S III doesn't have that option. I wish that Sony would push out a firmware update so that you can download LUTs onto the A7S III, but I'm not gonna hold my breath on that one. The workaround for that with the A7S III is to pick up an external monitor like the Ninja 5 and then download your LUTs to the Ninja 5 so that you can monitor what your footage is gonna look like through your monitor. But that's just another $500 accessory that you'll have to purchase for your camera, whereas the ZVE1, it's straight out of the box, can do that. By the way, speaking about monitors, the A7S III has more resolution on its display at 1.44 million dots, whereas the ZVE1's display only has 1.04 million dots. This isn't much of a difference, but every dot counts, as it makes it so much easier to pull focus when you're in manual focus or you're using a manual lens. There's a tally light on the front of the ZVE1, which is nice when you're recording yourself, whereas the A7S III is made more for being behind the camera. Heat management in the bodies has been both a hot topic and a point of contention between enthusiasts in the Sony market. I've heard it argued both ways that the ZVE1 will overheat way easier in warmer climates, especially because of its body design. And I've also heard people say that the ZVE1 did not overheat like they thought it would. I can tell you that the A7S III will most likely overheat slower because of its body design and the heat sink that's with inside of the camera. Both cameras detect face and eyes of humans, but the ZVE1 also recognizes the body and head in different poses. The ZVE1 can also recognize birds, insects, cars, and planes. So when it comes to autofocus, I would give it to the ZVE1, but I think you're splitting hairs because the A7S III's autofocus is so spot on. The ZVE1 also has auto intelligent modes for solo users, but that's kind of gimmicky to me. You can focus on a second person in the background, auto framing with a major crop factor, and microphone that will adjust to if you're in front or behind the camera, and just stuff like that. Anyone who is serious about professional video work will be using external audio and getting their frame right in camera, not having the camera adjust it for them so that when they come home they realize that the camera didn't frame their image right. I can't see myself using any of those functions. The A7S III has 5.5 stops of in-body stabilization, whereas the ZVE1 only has 5, which gives the A7S III a small advantage. The active mode electronic stabilization does have a 1.1 times crop on both cameras, and you can use catalysts because the cameras collect that gyro information within the camera. But the ZVE1 ZVE1 has dynamic active. The dynamic variant crops in further than the active stabilization to improve the performance and make the footage more steady. I prefer to just use post-production stabilization in my editing software because it seems to be easier than going through Catalyst. This seems like a good place to tell you how to enter the giveaway. Share with me how you discovered the Film Alliance and how you would use TimeBolt to help you with your edits. You can also throw in there how much editing you're doing as a bonus, 10 hours a week, 40 hours a week. I'd be very interested to know. Okay, breathing compensation. The breathing compensation feature on the ZVE1 only works with certain lenses, but I wish they would roll out a firmware update for the A7S III that had this feature. Breathing compensation eliminates the small changes in the field of view when changing focus points and makes your video look less amateur. The ZVE1 has built-in functionality of using the camera as a webcam to stream video and audio, so you don't need to go out and get a third-party software or hardware to do so. You just need the USB cable. The A7S III has a superior build quality with more buttons to customize and can manage internal heat during those longer recording sessions. And it's a photography camera because it has an EVF. If you need the real deal hybrid, I would go with the A7S III. The ZVE1 will be great for people who are shooting mostly video and want to get into that full frame arena to experience that dynamic range at a cheaper cost without breaking the bank. I hope you found this video helpful, and let me know which one of these two cameras is your favorite in the comments. I'm Joe, we have crossed the Rubicon, and this is the Film Alliance. Have a nice week.